Where I see the biggest miss, though, is I talk to people all the time, especially the older you get, the more you hear things like this that say, oh, I wish I would have, I always wanted to, I've thought about, I've considered those things, and no action has been taken. So my theory is most plans don't really fail on the follow through. More plans fail with the failure to start first. So a lot of people say, well, I start things, I don't finish them, but most people don't start things. And so I'm on this mission to help people press what I'm just calling the first domino. If you line dominoes up and you're going to like do that thing where you make pictures and knock them down, with that first domino to press it down. And it's typically a very, very simple step.
This is the Business of Advice podcast, where we help good advisors become great business owners.
Today, we have a TV celebrity that a few of you may know by name, but most of you will probably just know by his number. Bryan Neale was born and raised in Indiana and is an NFL referee, so you'll see him on Sundays, number 92. He has officiated Super Bowl 56, but on top of that, owns 7 different companies and is the founder and co-host of the Advanced Selling Podcast, the world's longest running sales training podcast. That we are going to talk a lot about that today. Also, Bryan actually spoke to our Advisors Excel team last month, and he was so incredible. I wanted to have him on the podcast. So, Bryan, welcome to the Business of Advice podcast.
Cody, thanks a bunch, man. I appreciate that. I hear those intros back, and it doesn't sound. I'm like, are you sure that you're reading the right thing there? So, I'm just an average dude from Indiana at the core, as we all are, just who we are. But thrilled to be here. Bummed we didn't get to do this live because I knew the weather. But
like it was probably that COVID thing going around when you were in person. So, but it was pretty fun because I really got to watch your presentation after the fact, and then watch it again before we recorded this. So was able to pick up on a lot of stuff we're going to talk about today that might not have had, if we're doing it right after you spoke. But let's start here. Not a lot of Super Bowl referees and professional sales trainers. So maybe just start by sharing your story and kind of journey to where you're at today.
Yeah, of course. The whole thing for me, it's funny. I used to this is a good thing for your listeners to hear because I'm pretty sure several of them have heard of the guy that I went to. So I used to talk about my story in terms of like, I really liked football, so I got my referee's license and then set some goals and wanted to get in the NFL. Well, I went to a guy named Bo Eason, who I think you're familiar with. Bo Eason, storytelling coach, great guy. I spent a day with Bo in his living room, pulling my personal story out. So what used to be, I really liked football. After I got to talk to Bo, became a much deeper story. It had to do with the relationship with my dad that was strained in my youth. And my football coaches became father figures to me. Yeah. And the football field became an escape for me to just deal with stuff I was dealing with emotionally. My parents splitting up, and I didn't have a bunch of friends when I was little. But on the football field, I could lash out in a controlled, legal environment. And so as I went forward to the end of my playing career, my football coach used to say funny things. You had to catch up with him. He used to say things like, he'd say, Neale, you could run all day in a shoebox. And I'd be like, what does he mean? Oh, you're saying I'm slow. Like he would say, Christmas morning gets here sooner than you do. It's that kind of thing. So I was too slow to play college football. My father figure coaches were the ones like, hey, you should, if you want to stay involved, you should get your referee's license. Kind of a dorky, nerdy thing when I first heard it. Then I'm like, they're like, here, they sold me like you can make beer money in college. I'm like, there's a selling point. So yeah, I took the test, got my license. Funny story about that. I scored 83 out of 100 on my first rules test. 83 out of 100. What people don't know is that test is a 100-question true-false open book test, and I still missed 17. So that's what's really wrong with officiating. Sports did. So that was it, man. And I just got hooked. My football coaches taught me to write goals down on note cards. We were required to when you played in my high school football program. So I took a little note card out after my first season. I was a sophomore in college, and I wrote down all this stuff. I wanted to ref in the Big Ten. I wanted to ref the state championship in Indiana by the time I'm 31, Big Ten by 36, NFL by 41, Super Bowl by 51. I didn't know how that stuff worked. I just knew that's what I wanted to do, and that was a good lesson for me. I didn't worry about the how. I just worried about the vision casting first, and then worked into the how along the way. And lo and behold, like anything, you start to work, and these serendipitous things happen. I worked the state championship when I was 30. I got into the Big Ten when I was 36, exactly the time. And then I got into the NFL when I was 44, missed that by 3 years. And then I got the call to work the Super Bowl when I was 52.
Missed it by a year. It's still,
missed it by a year.
Yeah.
Failed. That's why I tell people I failed. But so many great things, so many people helping along the way. And it's still the same for me, though. It's my release. It's my escape. It's where I go to just be present in something that makes me feel good inside. It's very, very emotional for me, which is the real reason I do it.
So we're going to talk some football, but I also want to talk some sales training. So maybe just share the whole story and origin of, Blind Zebra and what you're doing from a sales training perspective also.
Yep. I'm a self-proclaimed student activities geek from high school and college. I was in every club, everything imaginable, everything you could possibly be. I signed up for and joined. I was president of the Interfraternity Council at Indiana University, which is kind of like being king of the dip blanks. I'll leave that alone, but you get what, fill it in. And I always wanted to go into business. The business school at Indiana is really difficult.
Sure.
And the only thing I could hang on with in business school was marketing. I couldn't do accounting. I couldn't do finance. I just couldn't get it. So that was it. And then coming out of there, like the only kind of job to get was a sales or marketing job. And so I ended up landing in the sales by accident. I worked for Procter & Gamble. I sold toilet paper and paper towels for a living when I was 22 years old, which was not very compelling. But P&G was an awesome company.
Yep.
So 5 years there, fell in love with training. They were a great training org. P&G still is to this day. I love the training culture there. That's where I fell in love with it. But I was entrepreneurial in nature by DNA. I left after 5 years, started my own company called Cleaning Solutions. It was an environmentally friendly cleaning equipment and supply business in 1996, which is a great idea in 2024.
Yeah.
In 1996, it's an awful idea. No one cared about any of this stuff, no environmental stuff. And so I went bankrupt. After about 18 months, I lost not a lot of money in these terms today, but it was everything I had, and literally bankrupt, like behind on the car payment, worried my car was going to get repoed, just, dealing with collectors all the time and just in the worst possible place I was. So I started to work my way out of that, and I'm like, okay, now I'm broke. I shut the business down. What do? I said, I love personal development. I love selling. I love those two things. And one of my friends said, hey, my girlfriend works for a sales trainer. Why don't you go check that out? I didn't even know there was such a thing as sales training. Yeah. So I met a guy named Bill Caskey, who's my podcast partner on the Advanced Selling Podcast. We'll talk about it in a bit. And on June 3rd, 1997 is when I started in this business. And haven't looked back since. Just found my thing. Absolutely love it.
It's cool. Well, I'm excited to dive into sales. Obviously, a huge part of what so many of the advisors that listen to this. But I think all the time I like to say, any business owner, you have to be in sales to some degree, whether you realize it or not. I want you to, before we jump into sales, and then we'll jump into some football, one of the things you talked about a lot to our team was the theory of the first domino. And you shared multiple examples of that. I think, even your referee career is kind of, the example of a first domino. Would you just share that theory and just how it's, I don't know, I guess I would say kind of driven everything that you've done in your life and the value or importance of that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of my favorite things to talk about. My theory here is that a lot of people talk about planning, and so you do goal setting, you plan, and I'm a big fan of all that stuff. Where I see the biggest miss, though, is I talk to people all the time, especially the older you get, the more you hear things like this that say, oh, I wish I would have, I always wanted to, I've thought about, I've considered those things, and no action has been taken. So my theory is most plans don't really fail on the follow through. More plans fail with the failure to start first. So a lot of people say, well, I start things, I don't finish them, but most people don't start things. And so I'm on this mission to help people press what I'm just calling the first domino. If you line dominoes up and you're going to like do that thing where you make pictures and knock them down, with that first domino to press it down. And it's typically a very, very simple step. I love Tony Robbins. He's great. He talks about massive action. Take massive action. I'm going a little different with the first domino. I'm like, you just take the first itty bitty step. Itty bitty step. So I'll say things like, people like, I've always wanted to run a marathon. Like, oh, what do you got to do? You got to train for the marathon. Like, no, you don't. You need to go register. You need to go to the website and put your information in and pay $75 and register. Then you can start. But people like, they don't even register. Like, well, I decided not to do it. So I'm a huge fan of that. And when I think about anything in business, sale, doesn't matter what it is, but for the advisors listening, It's all sorts of things. We're doing one of those things. You did, and God bless you, Cody. I've been podcasting for 17 and a half years. It'll be 18 years in November. When did you start your podcast?
Probably 2 years ago now, a little over 2 years ago.
And before that, you had an idea, which was, I think I want to start a podcast. And at some point, you took the first domino. And, like I always tell people with podcasting, everyone goes, oh, I want to do a podcast. I'm like, okay, first domino for me, and I'll do this from a stage at times.
Yeah.
First domino for me in podcasting is go to Amazon and put in the search box, podcast starter kit, podcast starter bundle. It'll cost you $99 to get all the equipment you need, and it'll be at your doorstep in 24 hours or less.
Yep.
So that's the first domino. And so many people don't take that first step. They think about it, dwell on it. And here you are 2 years later, still podcasting.
Yeah.
Here you are, and here I am almost 18 years later. But it all started by an action, not by a thought or a consideration or I hope to, want to. Because so many people have heard me talk like I'm talking to you on my podcast. They've heard it for 15, 17 years, and they still haven't started. Still want to, still haven't started.
It was fun watching. As I said, I rewatched your presentation you did to our team, and even had someone playing the piano on stage that never played. So
it was. So that's another. So I play piano. I'm kind of a weird dude. I do a lot of stuff, but I hear that all the time. I'll sit down and play. People like, oh man, I wish I've been thinking about taking it. And so I just pull my phone and Google it. I'm like, okay, you go to Google and put how to play piano video and hit enter. You're going to get like 4 million videos that teach you how to play piano right there in front of you as the most basic things ever. But people just don't take that first step. And your colleague, I don't know
Katie,
yeah. So she was just so awesome. And we got up there, we sang Lean On Me. She played it right along with me. She did great.
Yeah.
I taught her how to make the chords, and we just did it. And the team started singing. It was one of the greatest experiences of my life. So thank you, and thank your team for that. Because it was the first time I had done that live. First domino. And there goes Katie. She's learned to play the piano.
That's fun. All right, let's dive into some sales. I want to talk a little bit about what you're doing with Blind Zebra, and know, especially sales operating systems. And one of the things I say a lot is when advisors join here, one of the things is that they tend to usually be pretty good at sales, maybe haven't necessarily named or documented their sales process real well. Mm-hmm. They're just a natural at it, or they've got the reps. But can you distinguish between what you would consider like a sales process versus like a sales operating system? And as they grow and scale, I think that operating system becomes such a big part of being able to achieve that.
Yes, absolutely. And we're in this transition phase at our firm where we've been sales training, sales coaching for years. That's always been the thing. And we started operating our business on a system called EOS. A lot of your listeners will be familiar with that.
Yep.
The Entrepreneurial Operating System, EOS. So the verbiage used there is we run on EOS, which Blind Zebra has run on EOS it'll be 3 years in November. Love it. By the way, it's based on a book called Traction by Gino Wickman. If people haven't heard of that, go check it out. And as I'm going through this process, it's hitting me in the head. I'm going, I have this for sales. I just don't have it documented this way. Mm-hmm. I've been trying to do this in a way that was more, a friend of mine says sales is 90% process and 10% magic. And I've been trying to teach the magic, the nuance, the thing to say that, and it's just okay. It worked well. It gave me a great living for a long time. But the real growth to me is in teaching people how to operationalize their selling system, their selling process. So what happens is people have a process. Let's say we've got a firm that has 50 advisors in it, nice large firm, and you have a process. You have a proven process. You have 5 steps. We do this, maybe look under the hood. Then we do this recommendations. And we do the protect, and then the grow, and all the thing. We do these 5 or 6 steps. A lot of your advisors have that.
Yep.
But if I've got 50 advisors, I'll typically see 50 people work that process differently. And that becomes this tribal knowledge of, well, I do this way, that way. And I'm very good. 10% of that I'm cool, but 90% of it needs to be the same. Mm-hmm. And this is like football. If you go to an NFL football practice and you think, boy, these athletes are so skilled, but beneath their skill is this hyper detailed systematic process that has to do with inches of steps and inches of degrees of a plant, of a leg or a foot or things, like inches in this big, violent, fast game to allow the 10% magic athlete part to come forward. So what we do now is we've taken, 20 years plus worth of content, and systemized it and put it into a tool form, very similar to EOS. For those of you, it's like EOS for sales. And you can lay that then over your process. So a simple example would be if you have a proven process and you have an initial discovery meeting with a family or a business owner, and you're going to, continue the conversation, we would teach you to establish what we call a mutual timeline. It's a mutual timeline agreement. It's a tool. Most people don't do that all the way through. They'll do maybe the next step, or, hey, I'll get some information, follow up with you. But we like to put it all out at once so that we have an ending date. So we say, hey, our process takes 30 days. On today's date's August 20th. That'll put us at September 18th as our aiming date to get to a point where you can say yes or no, and I can say yes or no. Things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Very basic, little duh factor to it, but people don't do it. They don't do it.
Brian, any advice on how, so going back to what you were just talking about, if you have multiple advisors and it's not a 90-10, that they're varied from that, any advice on how to manage that or to make sure that the team is following the process? Because I agree with everything you said. It really is 90% process, 10%, magic, but a lot of times it's more like 50-50 with some of your advisors. So any thoughts on how to coach or navigate them back towards following the process more closely?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question, and tough, because I know enough. I'm certainly no expert in the advisor world, and I also know there's an independent element to this.
Sure.
One, that there's a structural independent element, which they're either 1099 or they don't technically work for you. Then there's a cultural independence where people like to do things their own way and like to have that. So what we try to do is to let people get to a place where they say, this is how we do sales at Exceller. This is how we do sales at, Barrett and Stokely or whatever the firm is called. And if you want to come hang your shingle here and work with us, this is how we do sales. And it's how we do sales. It's not like negotiable. It's not rigid, but what we find is when people dig into especially the Blind Zebra sales operating system, the tools that we teach, work. They're not perfect by any stretch.
Yep.
And so the biggest thing I say is when you're creating a system or process in any way, shape, or form, make sure that it works for the person who you want to use it. Once that has happened, they just buy right in. And so advice-wise, that's what I would do. Instead of saying, well, do this because for me, or I'm the RIA, or I want visibility in a forecast, I think first about that user, about that individual advisor, and what do they struggle with day to day, week to week. Then I teach them that tool first. We reordered our tools that way so that you get biggest bang for the buck early. There's no foundation building.
Yeah.
The first tool you learn, the BZSOS system, you can use that afternoon to go rebook ghosted appointments. Every advisor has that problem. And it works 6.5 to 7 times out of 10. So then they go, this is really good. Let's see what else you got,
Yeah.
So
I like the two things you said there that I think are super valuable. One, just setting that expectation as you bring a new person on. I want to make it really, really clear. This is the expectation. This is the process. You're expected to follow it. And I think there's a number of reasons, we want a consistent experience as people interact with our firm, and
yes.
I can get to compliance and suitability reasons. There's a lot of reasons for that. But then I like that second one is hey, whatever you do best that you think is going to add a lot of value, teach them that right out of the gate. So they're like, man, this guy knows what he's talking about, or a gal knows what they're talking about, and they're going to want more of that. So I like that. Let me ask a second sales question. One of the things you talked about was the value of connecting, and what you said when you were here with our team was talking in stories is the most valuable way to connect with others. Would you just walk through just some of the stories that you think are valuable, as far as framework, but just then how to incorporate that more into your sales process?
Absolutely. One of my favorite topics. Again, I give Bowie loads and loads of credit for, I've been following him for years and got to spend some time with him personally. The first thing is just in general human interaction, stories are just fun. That's why we still have the movies. You think of these as, we have Netflix and we have binge shows that you watch because people just love stories. The human condition is just can't get enough. And so we don't go to the movie theater to look at PowerPoints. We go to see a compelling story that moves us, whether it's an action, a drama, doesn't matter, but that's why we do that. So just to buy into that idea that's the way to do it is the best thing you do. So as you're looking at any data point, there's a buzzy thing in IT called data storytelling. because people are realizing no one wants to look at the chart. They want to hear the story behind the chart.
Yep.
There's a story behind every piece of data. And so first to buy in on that's the first bit of advice I tell people. Buy into the idea that it's good. Then you just used it. There's a great YouTube video everyone should Google by Kirk Vonnegut, who goes through story arcs. And he's really funny. He's doing it on a chalkboard like in the 60s. But he's basically saying every story is the same. It has a beginning, middle, and end. Has a protagonist, an antagonist, a hero. And it moves you through an up and a down, and it resolves. That's what it does. It's a really cool framework. And any business story can be put in those frameworks, but it takes time and effort. You have to work at it. This is what Bo coached me so well on, is you have to really work to craft it. And you're not acting the story, you're telling it. Telling a reason. I was just literally, before we got on to record, talking to one of my clients who's adjacent to your business, not in it, but very adjacent to it. And he's a seasoned guy, very coachable, regional VP. He's got a team, talking about onboarding and stuff today. And he was talking about connecting not with the story, but more connecting on connectors, referral stuff.
Yep.
And I told him this little thing to do. And he goes, oh my gosh. He goes, you know what this reminds me of, Bryan, this thing you just talked about? When I first got into this business, I had to work for this guy. He started telling me a story back. And I'm like, his name's Lionel. I'm like, dude, that is fire, because I'm stealing your story. And it's way more important to say, everyone should ask for 2 referrals. I'm like, oh my gosh, tell a story about that. Lionel told me this awesome story. And I'm like, dude, I can use that story with anybody now about why I teach the way I teach. So I'm a huge fan of that. But the last lesson I'll say on the story part is you have to work at it. You got to work at being a good storyteller. Yeah. The great thing is we got video and phone now. You just record yourself and play it back. You don't have to show it to anybody. People think that's silly and dorky, but it's what you do.
Well, I know you mentioned Bo a few times. Shameless plug that I had him on the podcast, so people can go back and watch that. And only because he's one of the best I've ever seen at crafting and telling your story. So he talks a lot about that. You just mentioned, you're on a coaching call right before this. You've obviously coached and spoken to thousands of salespeople, and I think probably heard and seen some of the issues. Is there one deficiency in sales that you've seen most consistently, and that when you can correct it has had the biggest impact on people's success? And then maybe, obviously, what is it? But how do you go about correcting that?
Yes. This is going to sound so basic, but it's just rampant. My coach, David Meltzer, who's another guy you should get on your podcast, by the way. David Meltzer, he was the president of Lee Steinberg Sports Agency. In fact, Lee Steinberg, that's who Jerry Maguire is based on.
Yep.
So Dave ran his company, and Dave now has a show and a network and all sorts of fun things. David Meltzer. And it sounds so basic, but it's true. He's taught me, and I was okay at this when I first started working with him. Now is being a student of your calendar and extreme calendar clarity. And I know that sounds so basic, but just pay attention. If you're listening to this, pay attention to how many times you say or hear things like, let's talk in a couple weeks. Let's regroup at the end of the month. Let's visit that mid-October. Those are all very vague statements. They're all up for debate. When's mid-October? I don't know. Is it the 15th? And the easiest fix with the biggest bang for the buck is getting people to be extremely detailed with numeric values on their calendar and sales. And I know that's not fun. That's like a aha, hit me in the head. But people are not good at it. They are not good at setting very clear, and not just follow-up dates. I'm talking about agreed to times to meet, documented timelines that end. So if I'm talking to a business owner and I'm an advisor, I want to have a proven process that takes a certain number of days or weeks, and get that point that particular opportunity to the point where they know on September 6th they're going to tell me yes or no. And if they tell me yes, they're going to be a client. We're going to onboard them. If they tell me no, I'm going to say thanks. It's been great. I'm still going to try to stay in touch with them down the road. And I close lost and I go on. People just do not let themselves have calendar clarity to the degree that I think they should. And again, a little bit boring, but just audit. If you're listening to this, audit yourself.
Yeah.
Go look at your open opportunities and tell me how many dates do you have agreed to by the prospect, the prospective family or business owner, with a green check mark. How many of those do you have? If you have 10 open opportunities, I bet that it's 2 or 3. Now for your group, it's probably much higher than that because you guys are extra good. But
well, I think one of the things we do teach advisors, that I've seen the value of it. You're taking this to probably another level. It's like having that upfront clarity of what your process looks like and what the potential client can expect. one of the reasons we've taught that for forever, I say we taught it, our advisors teach it, right? They share what works for them with each other, but it removes all that pressure up front, right? People are coming in, I say all the time, they're sitting out in your parking lot before they walk into your office saying like, no matter what they say today, we're not buying,
Totally.
And then when you can say like, hey, I just want to be clear here, we have a whatever 4 step process. Here's what it looks like. You're not going to be asked to make any decisions. Here's what today's going to look like. Here's what our next appointment's going to look like. It just removes all that pressure, and it's immediately different. What I love about what you said is like putting some clarity around like, we're going to meet here. So before you leave, we're going to set the date for these next, few things and hold them accountable to it. That's just another degree to that, which I love.
That's what it is. I would even add on the process. Sorry, I just can't help myself.
Yeah.
I love talking about this. Like if you look at the Blind Zebra process, we have a slide that shows our process. It has the steps of the process, the meetings of the steps. It also has the times of the meetings, meaning the length. So this meeting is a 30-minute meeting. This one is an hour. Yeah. Game plan's an hour. The next one, the go-no-go is a 10-minute meeting. Yellow flags is a 40-minute meeting. So they can even look and go, I know how many days and even how many minutes I'm going to invest.
Yeah.
People love that level of clarity.
That's cool. Yeah.
And it's differentiating. Great. It's very differentiating. Don't tell anyone.
Make that note. So,
exactly.
So this is maybe not as much of a sales question, but it maybe of how people respond. I think you have this perspective of being a referee. You've seen head coaches, obviously, in some of the most stressful situations, but I think you've also seen sales leaders in highly stressful situations. When the pressure is really on, how do whether it's coaches, sales leaders, how do they rally their team? Like what have you seen that really works there?
That's a great question. And I got that. This one was a fun one. Why you kind of prepped me on it. I'm like, ooh, that's a really good question. Here's where I'm landing. The first is predictability of behavior. I observe sales teams, so in your world, advisors who maybe report to a CEO or owner of a firm or whomever that is, that the biggest problem they have is when they can't predict the behavior of their leader. When they go off this way or that track, or like, oh my gosh, what is their deal? It's very uncomfortable for people to see an unpredictable behavior from a leader. So my group, I work really hard, even on the football field. My group knows when the stuff hits the fan, how Bryan reacts. And I actually tend to, when the stuff hits the fan, chill. I get very calm. My pulse goes down. And I go very process orientation. Do that, and then the whole crowd's screaming, like, what's going on? I'm like, well, we're going to work through the process here, gang. Mm-hmm. Step 1, step 2. Just like a pilot flying a plane. It's bad. I hate it, but I watch air disasters. It's like, I have my pilot's license, so I'm fascinated by flying, but also why crashes are typically small mistakes along the way.
Yeah.
You'll see pilots that save stuff. Sully, the guy who landed the plane, if you listen to the audio of Captain Sully landing a jet in the river, you'll hear him the whole time. We're going to be in the Hudson. It's predictable. He was so calm. So that's the number one thing. Do I stay calm in that deal? The second thing, then you hear me saying it, is you have to be decisive. Even if you're wrong in refereeing, we have this dorky phrase, be wrong strong. Be wrong strong. If you're going to be wrong strong. Do not, people do not like that. They may not agree with your decision, but when the crap hits the fan, you need to be decisive. Calm and decisive. That, to me, wins the game. I think people rally around that strength.
That's good. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
Great answer to that. I think that predictability of people and knowing what to expect, but right, yes. And then also this firm demeanor around it. So maybe transition to some football questions. So yeah. I've always said the reason I could never be a referee is like when someone starts screaming at me, my ability to keep my composure would probably not be well. But obviously, you guys do that really, really well. How do you keep a calm demeanor when you have head coach screaming and yelling at you on the sideline?
Yes, it's very difficult. You're human. Everyone's human, and your human condition is you're made to react certain ways. Some of us lash back. Some of us go into a shell. So it takes conscious effort to be there. So little tricks of the trade that I've used over the past. The first is I try to, it sounds crazy to think about this in pro football. I try to use empathy as a tool to see the other person's side. So instead of instant defensiveness, because there's this like competitive, there's lots of testosterone, it's all this, is to say, where are they coming from? What are they asking me? What are they trying to know? What are they trying to accomplish? What do they want to hear? Not like to placate them, but to say, what are they trying to, what information do they need? And so that helps me calm down and just get within. The biggest tactical tool I use in those situations are clarifying questions, because it happens all the time. I've never seen anything, and I just started doing this sort of accidentally. Now I'm like teaching it, to diffuse a situation. So what happens is use a player. Ref. Hey, my number's 92. 92, he's holding me. It used to be like, oh yeah, defense back. I'm like, who's holding you? The guard. Now here I go. Which guard? And they're like, see now they're in a different headspace, because now the left guard. I'm like, 68 he is. I go, okay, I'm gonna talk to him. I go, hey, 68. That guy said he's holding you, or you're holding him. He's like, no, I'm not holding him. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna just take a peek here. So then I'll go tell the kid, I'll go, hey, I talked to 68. I'm gonna watch here and see what goes on. And of course, 68 won't hold him. Little tricks of the trade, And I'll go to that defender and I'll be like, hey man, that was clean. Okay, thanks for watching. Now it's calm.
Yeah.
Versus like, well, you got to get away from it, or he wasn't holding you, like, that sort of stuff.
That's good. So, you shared a great story. This is good going deep into football, but I thought it was awesome. The Richie Incognito story of
yes,
right. I mean, which I thought was cool about that is like those players, obviously it's a little bit of a game, right? And
it is.
How do you play that game as the referee and the players? The players obviously are playing a game, and I don't know if there's even a lesson in there. I think it's a fun story, but like, is there a lesson in that of like, you have to understand, like, I even think as a sales leader, understanding that even the people you're managing may play certain games, right? And how do you
yes.
hold them accountable to that? So
yes.
maybe tell that story, just any lesson you have from that.
Yes, there are, veteran players. I mean, their whole job's to win.
Yeah.
They want to win everything, the game, but they want to win the quarter. They want to win the half. They want to win the series. They want to win the play. Like, everything comes back to this competitive win thing. And they want to get every edge they can and, stay within the rules. So some players will, if they get called for a foul, will actually foul the next play, because they think the human dynamic of a ref's like, well, they won't call fouls back to back. And I had that happen. First one, second one comes, and the player knew everything was good. Like, he got called for holding, next play, holds again. Like, this is the thing. So, but the way to do that on my side, and you've heard this sometimes in football, this is great sales stuff.
Yeah.
We need to have really good short-term memories, because we get these losses or we get these data points in a particular sales process. We think it's going great, and then we get a hiccup. Hey, I went home and I talked to my spouse, and she's a little uncomfortable. We thought it was going great, and all of a sudden it's not. And then we like blow that up and lay it over the rest of the process. It's just one data point, and whatever happened yesterday happened yesterday. So we say, play the next play, play the next play. And that's the way then to see each play objectively. And so if a player fouls on play 58 and we're going to run play 59, 58's over, I'm going to referee 59 the same way I should referee any play.
Yeah.
And then if there's another foul, there's another foul. That's just how it goes. That takes a lot of skill and development to be able to detach. That's one of our guiding principles in our operating system, detachment. It's really hard to do for salespeople, I think.
Yeah.
And leaders sometimes,
No, but I like that of like being able to move on. Like, okay,
yes,
what happened? Now we've got to move on to the next play. It's a big part and evaluate that play, and not get caught up on the last one. Another question I wanted you to just maybe, ask it, but just talk through a little. So I feel like the best people in any profession, and I would say, to make it to the NFL, you're kind of the best of the best, right? It's the cream of the crop. But I think the thing that distinguishes the best in any profession is their preparation. And so would you just talk through a little, like, I'm curious what, like, the preparation for a game. Let's say you're going to come, ref a game in Arrowhead this year. Like, what does the preparation look like as a referee as you're heading into that game? Is it like, knowing the team's inside and out, or is it like, no, we're just going in, like, paying attention to, the fundamentals of what we know?
Yeah, it's, so I'm a huge fan of books. Malcolm Gladwell's fun read is a book called Outliers. In that book is a chapter called 10,000 Hour Rule. The 10,000 Hour Rule. If you haven't read that book, it's a great book. That chapter, 10,000 Hour Rule, speaks to this first. There's the preparation of the week, which I'll talk about in a second. Before that, though, is that 10,000 hour rule that I just don't think there's any substitute for, which is essentially the more financial plans I write, the more, millionaires I hang out with and advise, the better I'm going to be. And so I'm constantly looking for reps. It's a cliche thing, as you know, in your world, but when I ask a financial advisor, everyone's getting better at this. I'm like, so who are you trying to meet? They all say, oh, high net worth individuals. And I'm like, okay, that's vague. What does that even mean? But I love the idea of like, I want to get as many reps as I can. So if I'm a financial advisor, I'm looking for as much practice as I can, as many, cases to ride, whatever that is. So I'm looking, that's the first bit of prep. So the prep that I'll have at Arrowhead in week 6 would include 37 years of prep before that. And there's just no substitute for that. And I know some younger people want to get there. They want to get the big case fastest. And I'm like, you got to work through the whole thing. I don't know if that's like that in the advisor world where,
million times.
Yeah, right. Someone comes in like, oh, I'm going to, I'm looking for people with 10 million to 20 million in assets. And, you're 24, you just passed your test. So,
yeah,
like, get some wins, get some experience. So that's the first thing.
Yep.
When we go tactically into the prep, because of video these days, we get video on iPads. The NFL is very big into parity. So we see all the video of all the teams. Everybody has access to the same video. So I can pull up any play from basically any season, the last 4 seasons, and watch it over and over. High def, slow-mo, all that stuff. So it's constant prep. So if I'm going into, work the Chiefs-Eagles game, whatnot, then I've got videos of those 2 teams all the last 3 years plus this year. So I can look for, and we're really watching there is more formation tendency things, more like coaches than we're like refs. We're not looking for players to foul a lot because we want to go in there clean. That's not what we're looking for. What we're looking for is, hey, they tend to cut block on the backside. So that becomes a risky move. Mm-hmm. So we're just aware of it. Or they tend to go forward on 4th down 80% of the time. Just stuff like that. We evaluate our previous week's game. If we have a game Sunday that ends, there's a grading process that goes through, happens Sunday night into Monday, Tuesday. Those grades get finalized Wednesday. Then that week is put to bed. So that's part of our prep, learning from the previous week. Now we go Thursday, Friday, Saturday into the next week. That's where we're looking at teams, scenarios. I'm looking for matchups. If I have a rookie left tackle blocking a 4-time All-Pro defensive end, I'm aware of that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just how you'd scheme that and that sort of thing. And then we have 3-hour meetings on Saturdays usually. We'll grab dinner together. I love college football. I know you said you're big K-State fans. I love watching college football Saturday night at my hotel by myself. We have a non-denominational devotional on Sunday mornings, voluntary, but most people come, which is my favorite meeting of the week because we just talk about real stuff in the room. It's really, really great. Then we go to the game 3 hours before, whole bunch of hubbub stuff, as you might imagine, forms to fill, people to meet. And then eventually the game kicks off, work the game, bunch of paperwork, and then that resets. We do that 17 times a year.
That's cool. And then do you, I kind of know, but like for the audience, do you watch, are you in the same position every game? Are you switching around? How does that work from a referee standpoint?
Yep. You work the same position. So there are 9 people on a crew, on an NFL crew. There are 7 people on the field, and there are 2 crewmates in the replay booth that help us on the replay scenarios. You tend to always work on the field a position. So I came in as what's called the umpire. That's the technical name for it. And I ref the lineman. So I'm refereeing the inner line play, and I also administer the game. So I'll mark off penalties. I'll carry the ball, mark penalty. I'll put the ball down, all that kind of stuff. I jokingly say it's like being the bass player in a band. Not a real cool job, but if it's gone, if nobody's doing it, it sounds funny.
Yeah.
So.
Well, it's also when the game's on the line, you got to spot that ball quickly too. So
the 2-minute drill.
Then all the pressure's on you. So
it's tons of press. That is fun and not fun for me. I'm the only one that technically touches the ball in that 2-minute drill. And we, as much as this old man slow run all day in a shoebox, the call back from earlier can run. I run.
That's it. And then a random question. I think you were part of the referee crew that called the offsides on James Toney in that Chiefs game.
I was not
for the touchdown. Oh, okay. Making sure.
I just like to make sure everybody knows I was not part of that crew. No, not there. Not guilty. I
think one of the questions someone asked you at ours that I thought was an interesting answer is like, do referees have makeup calls? And I know you answered it no, but just maybe expand on that a little.
Yeah, not in any way, shape, or form. You're so heavily evaluated, and every play is its own play. Like I said earlier, play the next play. And I jokingly say I'm for me. Like people are like, who you cheering from? Like I'm for 92. I point to my number. Like I want to have a good game. And when you go back to my why, like the whole, it's extremely important to me, and the game is important to me, and you want to leave it clean and have it clean. There's too much to think about too. There's just the other thing I jokingly say, you got people out here making millions of dollars, like, they're working hard. They earned all that stuff, but you think I care about them?
Yeah.
I'm not in it for them. I just love them. I respect them, but I'm not trying to like do anybody any favors here. I'm for me. I want to do as good a job as I can, make money for my family. I'm so lucky to get to do this because it's such an eye of a needle, and leave it clean. That's what I want to do.
That's good.
No, I'm sorry no script, no makeup calls. Everybody wants the script, no script.
So one, speaking of no script for how to handle a situation, I think you refereed a game that I think everyone is familiar with. Maybe probably one of the most, what at the time appeared very tragic situations on the field, and that was the Damar Hamlin game where he collapsed on Monday Night Football. I know you were. You see, it's like you were right there beside him when that happened. I think one of those just, kind of captivated the nation in scary way, but then became, I think, a little positive. But like, what was that like being literally right in the middle of that? And is there anything that taught you about just keeping perspective on life?
Yeah, it was, football's brought me some of the greatest things in my life, like without question. And it also brought me the worst thing, one of the worst things, definitely, which is seeing Damar collapse right at my feet. If you watch that video back, there's a referee in the shot. So Damar kind of runs up. That's me, 92. You'll see it on my back. And as he starts to collapse, it was very odd how it was weird. So someone threw me the ball. I actually ignored the ball if you watch the video back, and I just started to watch him, and I watched him, and as he fell, I caught eyes with him, and his eyes just went back into his head, and he started to shake on the ground. And so instantly you knew something wasn't right. He didn't get hit, though, so it was nothing made sense, in that moment. Then the medical department and the medical first responders in the National Football League, there's no better place to be than a hospital. An NFL football field is the next best place. There's everything they have there. And they drill that. They drill most of it. We're involved a little bit because we're a first responder. And it just went into work, and it became an emergency room. I will tell you, I flipped immediately into dad mode because I have 5 kids, and Damar's a young dude, and it just became nothing about football as a human thing. And for me, it was like a dad. I just kept looking at him. I tell this story. I'm not going to cuss, but I cussed when I said this, but on the field. But he, when you bring a newborn home, if you have kids, you bring a newborn home, their first kid, one of the things you do is you stare at their stomach to see if they're breathing. At least that's what I did. You bend down there like, is she breathing? She breathing? Oh yeah, there it goes. And that's all I was doing, man. I was staring at the kid's stomach, and it was just flat. I'm like, come on, man, breathe. All of a sudden, they did all the work on it. You start to see some breathing, and then he still wasn't out of the woods at that point. But it was just. It was, in the oddest way, and thank God it turned out the way it did.
Yeah.
It was one of the best things that I think could happen for a reset for perspective with football in general in the NFL. It just really humanized everything going on out there. And it allows us nowadays, with Damar being healthy and still working, to, make a roster. He's a football player. It still is always there. It's always there. He's always there. It's always there for us to, anytime we do lose perspective, when we get all, our team got beat or we made a bad call and screwed up a game. Like, I've got that in my head, burned in my head for life. I can always call that back and say, you know what?
Yeah.
Stuff's way bigger. There's some stuff that's way bigger than this. One of my friends gave me a great quote. I came up through the Big Ten. I worked a Michigan, Ohio State game. I'm a Midwestern guy. That's the mecca of college football. And I'm scared to death. I can't even talk before the game. And one of my good friends came up to me. He said, just remember, about 6.9 billion people on the planet don't give a crap about this game.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's a really good point. There are a bunch of people on the planet that don't care about this game. So,
but there were 500,000 who really do care a lot.
A ton. And
there were 100,000 in the stadium that day.
That cared. Really like 110.
Yeah.
12. Yeah.
One other thing on the Damar Hamlin situation, I think as a leader, I always say, I remember watching it. I was watching it with my son, actually, and it was just, like you said, it was weird when it happened, but then being able to have that perspective of like, what are they going to do here, right? And the commentators didn't really know what was going on. Obviously, you were kind of down in the middle of that. Was there anything you learned about just like, as a leader, how do you process and make decisions? And ultimately, I feel like everyone felt like they made the right decision by canceling that game. But like just being in the middle of that, obviously, and I'm sure you were involved in all the thought process that was going into a decision like that. But how do you make the right decision in a situation like that, or just anything you saw there that was like a great leadership lesson?
Yeah, there were so many, and I'm watching it, and I was heavily involved, and can't really talk about all the detail, but I will say this, back to one of the other comments we talked about, the leadership was predictable. The leaders in the NFL, the people that I work for, are predictable leaders, which makes people follow them. And we were in unprecedented territory, and just like flying a plane, if there's smoke in the cockpit, you go to the smoke in the cockpit checklist, and you follow the checklist, or you go in the engine on fire checklist. But we didn't have a checklist for this. So we had to make the checklist up as we went. There's a scene in Apollo 13 where they dump all this stuff on this table, and they say, hey, the guys are about to run out of oxygen. There's too much carbon dioxide. Make an air scrubber. That's what scrubs the CO2. And they did it. There's no checklist. They made it. So we went as we go. But what was true about all that was, going back to my earlier point, everyone was intense and calm at the same time, and systematic and methodical. And that to me was a great lead. No one was freaking out, even though we saw, an unprecedented situation for millions and millions of people. No one was freaking out. And there were steps that had to be taken in consideration that most people don't think about. Reverse engineering security of a stadium is a huge endeavor. All of the posts of when you leave a stadium, security is still an issue. You can't just say, everybody, the game's over, go home. You have to have people, police, traffic, all has to be, consideration for DeMar to get from the stadium to the hospital. Well, he didn't want, 40,000 people walking outside. Totally. Like, let's get him there. There's all sorts of considerations that people didn't realize were happening, that happened, I thought, as good as they could have possibly happened, that made, for a good outcome, but also a very reasonable, series of decisions.
Yeah, no, that's good. Maybe one final, this is I guess a football question, but you started at the beginning talking about just the coaches that had made an impact on your life when your dad wasn't super present there. Yeah. You shared a story at ours, in kind of a first domino story, but about Coach Tom, and just maybe everyone here talks about Coach Tom, right? So I just think that's a great way to end it up before we jump into some lightning round questions. Just love you to share that story.
Absolutely. Yeah. So when my parents split up and I moved back to my hometown, which is about 3 hours from my dad's house, my grandpa signed me up for Little League football in an attempt to give me some friends. And that's where I kind of fell in love with this game. And my Little League coach, his name is Tom. Coach Tom Simpson was his name. And he became my father figure when I was in 5th and 6th grade. We had a lot of fun. We won a lot of games as Little League, and I fell in love with this football thing. And he was a volunteer coach, like a lot of, he's a, guy that with kids, and just volunteer coach Little League. Go on, play in high school, go to college, and I start telling my story. I tell my story. Bo Eason kind of pulls this out of me, and then he goes, "You need to talk about Coach Tom more." So I start doing that. Well, I'm giving a speech back in my hometown. I'm talking about Coach Tom. Guy comes up to me after the speech and said, "Hey, Tom Simpson's my next door neighbor." I'm like, "No way." He said, "Yeah." Because I don't think he knows that he had this impact on you. I'm sure he doesn't. I hadn't seen him for 40 years. Yeah. He goes, "Well, good news, bad news. Good news is he's my neighbor. Bad news is he has a fatal lung condition that's going to take his life sooner than later. He's on oxygen, but he's still alive. And so you should go meet him." So I got a chance to go meet Coach Tom again after 40 years, wore my Little League jersey, which used to have shoulder pads. Now holds just the dad bod in, and just got a chance face to face to tell him what he meant to me. I had been in the NFL. I hadn't worked the Super Bowl at this time. And I encourage everyone to, call their Tom, to just tell him that. It's a great thing. He passed away several months after that. His wife called me to let me know, and she said, "Hey, when Tom was on his deathbed, he wrote 4 letters from hospice. He wrote one to each of his 2 sons, one to his wife, and he wrote one to me." And she FedExed this letter to me, and I'm looking at it, thinking about opening it. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to wait till I work the Super Bowl to open this letter. And it was 2 years later. It sat in a FedEx envelope. I go work Super Bowl 56. I come back to a dark hotel room. My family wasn't back yet. They were stuck in traffic. And I cracked that letter open. And first letter said, "Bryan, if you're reading this, I will be gone." And he just said some really kind things. And mainly the message was that to know that I impacted, one young man's life makes my life seem so meaningful. And to know that he had that feeling before he passed away. So there's just no better gift. So
yeah,
I tell everyone,
cool.
call your Tom.
Yeah, that's the big thing. I think that's what
Call
everyone
your
was
Tom.
talking about here is call your Tom. Like, who's someone that was impactful in your life that you haven't either told or just haven't talked to in a while?
Yep.
It's a great one. Okay, I want to jump into some lightning round questions.
Ready?
I always ask the same 5. I'm throwing a few curveballs in. I'm going to add some lightning round questions since we have, a famous NFL referee here on. And I'm going to not put you on the spot completely, but I ask a few of these. Like, what's your favorite stadium to walk into? Is there one NFL stadium that you think is just the best?
I'm a purist. Lambeau is just a magic place.
Yeah.
Just love it. And I'm a college football junkie at heart. I love State College, PA.
Yeah. Two
iconic
ones for sure.
Yeah.
So Chiefs fans won't hold that against you too much. So they'll probably boo you when you come in there.
That's allowed. They do anyway.
Yeah. So I won't put you on the spot to ask you about someone who is currently coaching, but as you think back over your career of coaching, is there one coach that you just admired a lot? Like maybe even the most, just someone like watching how they handled everything on the sideline, the way they led their team, the way they interacted with people. Is there one coach that jumps out to you that you really admired, and then maybe why?
Yeah, I'm going to go back to my playing days at first, but because I had a coach in high school named Mark Anderson, who was one of the guys that very polarizing as a football coach, but really brought the most out of me and made me aspire to do great things. Was probably the first and foremost, the biggest one to me. And then in the college ranks, it was fun. I loved. I worked. Ty Willingham and Charlie Weiss coached against each other after Ty Willingham had gotten fired from Notre Dame, and then Charlie Weiss was then the coach of Notre Dame. And I worked the Notre Dame Washington game, so it was Ty versus Charlie. And Ty was messing with us before the game. We said, hey, your team's going to come out first, and he goes, we're going to refuse to come out. And I was like, oh my God, I was brand new in the Big Ten at that time, and he's like, yeah, we're gonna refuse to come out, so you have to deal with that. I'm just like, oh my God, what's going on? And he's like, I'm just kidding, and I'm like, oh my gosh. So I love that because I love someone being in that sort of tense situation. He had gotten fired, he gotten rehired somewhere else, and to think, that's very noble of a person to be able to not hold grudges. Very competitive still. I just really admired that in him. It taught me a lesson too, for perspective, which was pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, as a Kansas State fan, I quite admired Charlie Weiss in his time at KU. So
I'm sure you did.
Wonderful for me.
Yes.
And this may be putting you on the spot too much, so if you don't want to answer, but any coach that you just couldn't stand, and we don't have to talk about any active ones. But
I'm not going to use any names on this, but yes, there's a list. And most of it has to do with I say like in any endeavor, if you're a financial advisor, 99% of the people are awesome. 1% are jerks or less. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And there's always one or two. Just how they deal with stuff doesn't have to be how they deal with stuff. So yes, I'm not going to say names.
Yeah. Okay.
We'll talk off air.
I didn't figure.
Okay. You got to ask though.
Now I'm going to move into a few more of the traditional questions. But starting with COVID, I said I think every leader started like maybe reevaluating some things. But is there a lesson that you learned after COVID that you think you'll carry forward for the rest of your life?
100%. The moment that you think it's as bad as it can be, it could be as good as it can be if you just switch your mindset. I thought I was going to go out of business. I remember sitting at my piano. I played piano, so this is how I release stress. I'm like, I'm going to have to go find a job. No one's going to want to get in a room and do sales coaching anymore. And I'm like, eat my own stuff. What do I do? Abundance. Okay, abundance. What else is there? Everyone needed to learn how to sell remotely because no one knew how to do that. I'm like, okay, I got to build a TV studio and I got to write some content on how to sell remotely. And then our business took off. We went from 14 clients pre-COVID to 90 a year and a half later.
Yeah.
What could be the worst could turn out to be the best.
So it is so fun watching that, even I think with the advisors and just how they all rallied, because that first month or two, everyone's like, well, our whole livelihood is sitting face to face with people.
Right.
We're not going to be able to do that. But what I say too is like now looking back, the improvements that I think advisors made to their business that are having this ongoing impact is really neat to see. So great perspective.
Awesome. Yeah.
What is the one thing? So this could be refereeing, it could be in sales. What's the one thing that took you from being good to great?
Oh, what a great question. Getting okay in my own skin. I fought that for a long time. Still have bouts of it. Some people call it imposter syndrome. Is a very common thing. Is to feel like, no, I'm actually right where I'm supposed to be, no matter how high or how low that is at any one point in time, and to accept those circumstances. I always would fight circumstances. Things weren't going well, I'd fight out of it. Things were going great, I was taking credit. And that didn't serve me very well in life. So just becoming okay with my own skin, where I am and where I'm standing is where I'm supposed to be, and everything's going to be okay. That I think allowed me to do some cool
flourish. That's good.
Yeah.
Okay. Third question. Is there something that you are doing this year to drive your own personal growth that you are excited about?
Yes. I love this question because it's counterintuitive to what most people would think. I am trying very hard to slow down and cut back.
Yeah.
I run too hard and too fast. And I finally got some direct feedback from a couple of really dear friends who are not in business. One of my friends is a retired teacher, he's an NFL ref. And we're walking back from dinner last year, and he's like, dude, you need to slow down. You're running too hard, man. I know you. I love you as your brother. You got to watch yourself. You're going to lose your health. You know, I'm like, oh my gosh, he's right. So I am really, really working on throttle down, slow down. Don't have to chase everything all the time.
Yeah, that's
good. My thing for the year.
Yeah. Well, you were a man after my own heart when you said you don't make checklists, because I'm not a checklist guy. Despite all the things I have going on, I'm not a checklist guy either. So,
find one.
But I think there's times where I've processed that I probably do need to slow down on some things. So and appreciate a little more relax.
Yes.
Okay. Fourth question: is there one book, or what is the one book that you have recommended most to other leaders?
No, this is such a hard question. I'm going to give one again that's a little counterintuitive to people. There's a book called Necessary Endings by a gentleman named Henry Cloud.
Sure.
Yeah, Dr. Cloud. That book was a bit of a life change. I was going through a really, really bad time in my life. And it was very helpful for me to accept life on life's terms. Necessary Endings, which isn't this like, go get it. Here's a tactic. You know, it's a very, very personal book, but it helped me do to get okay in the own skin that allowed then things to flourish.
Yeah. Yeah, I think too, if anyone's going through some transition in life, that's an incredible. So
it's a great book,
Okay, final question. What is the best piece of advice you've ever received?
Okay, I'm going to two answers. The first one is my buddy who said slow down so far is like tip top of the event. And the last one I got from a guy a long time ago, and this is so simple, but he said, I was all wigged out about something, and he goes, Bryan, everything's going to be okay. Everything's going to be okay. It doesn't matter. And the COVID, I say that all the time to myself. Everything's going to be okay. Everything's going to be okay. And he was right. It always is. It always is.
I try and tell our team that here a lot, my family too. It's like, how often do things not end up working out? Like, we end up worrying so much about stuff that, ultimately in the grand scheme of eternity also, it's like, doesn't matter all that much. So that's great final advice to wrap with. Bryan, appreciate carving out some additional time. I know we were going to do this in person until I got sick, but I know I spoke a little bit about your podcast, but can you just share with people how they can follow along, stay in touch with you, what you're doing at Blind Zebra, maybe plug the podcast also?
Absolutely love to. And thanks for having me on too, by the way. I love your community, and I bragged on you before we get on here, but the culture you've created is just, I work with, like I said, 60, 70 companies at a time. You got to do it as good as anything cultural. And it all starts with leaders. I see teams with cultures. I see players with, it all starts with the leader, the culture. So bravo for that. Ways to get a hold of us, Blind Zebra. I'm a huge LinkedIn person. That's my social media of choice. So Bryan, Bryan Neale. You just go to LinkedIn, connect me, tell me you heard me on the podcast, and I'll shoot you a note back. I work my own LinkedIn profile, so it's me. You know what I mean? It's not a robot. Occasionally, the marketing team will jump in there, but 99% of the time it's me. So LinkedIn, number one. And then Advanced Selling Podcast is the name of our podcast. If you even Google sales podcast, we're on every list. We've been doing it for 18 years. We just outlasted everybody.
Yeah.
So it'll pop up. We've got over 1,100 episodes, a free app. We just talk, we go figure, and all that time we've got a lot of episodes. Got a second one though that we just started with my friend Margaret. a little different slant called Sales Unscripted. Has a little different vibe to it. Sales Unscripted. We're a year and a half into that. Would love for some people listening to this to go over and check out Sales Unscripted. Little different vibes. Male female vibe. Margaret's a little younger, a little different energy than what Bill and I have. So check that.
That's
out.
great. Bryan, again, appreciate the time, and tons of resources out there. People go follow, and I think they'll enjoy what they see. And then we'll look for you on Sundays. Everyone now knows to look for number 92 when they're watching their favorite game.
You can yell at me by name now.
Awesome. Thank you, Bryan.
Cheers.